When I first visited Manchester, Vermont in the early 1990s, it was obvious that the place to stay was the Equinox. Through the years, I am amazed at wherever you go, whenever you get onto the subject of Manchester, Vermont, you say you live there type of thing, that people know the Equinox and they visited it. And they consider me to be a lucky person living in this community. So with the Equinox, I would like to introduce Roger Aberth, our guest for this edition of Danny Frank. Roger is the general manager of the Equinox, and Roger was appointed GM a little more than a year ago. Roger Aberth, who owns the Equinox at this time?
Right now it's owned by a company called Carey Watermark. It's a non-publicly traded REIT. They purchased the hotel in February of 2016. And it's a fairly small company. They have about 40, 50 hotels, but a lot of—
That's small?
Well,
yeah.
Compared to some of the other bigger companies out there. But it is, they do have some really nice resorts. They love resorts. They have the Hawks Cay Resort in the Florida Keys, for example, the Sanderling, which is out on the Outer Banks. So they were really pleased when they were able to purchase this property. Very proud of it.
And they're local, or they're headquartered where?
Well, they're headquartered out of New York City, is their main offices. They do have an office also in Chicago. But, they do have hotels all throughout the states, including the West Coast.
So, Roger Aberth, how were you recruited? How were you drafted?
Well, I was with Starwood for Starwood Hotels and Resorts for many years, which is now Marriott. Marriott has purchased Starwood. And I was abroad, actually, for 18 years, working in Latin America for Starwood Hotels and Resorts. So I was worked in Uruguay twice. I worked in Argentina twice. I was in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro for 3 years. I was in Cancun in Mexico twice. So I got some really nice postings. But after a while, the kids were sort of at elementary, middle school age, and we decided to get them back to the States into the education system. So I was transferred to Northern Virginia, where I was at the Westin Arlington Hotel, as well as the Sheraton Tyson's Corner. And that was terrific. But then I got a phone call from someone that I had worked with previously, and they said, we have this great position available at the Equinox in Vermont. And, Vermont has always been a big part of my childhood. We vacationed here every vacation. We had a place in Roxbury, Vermont, which is near Norwich University, Northfield, Vermont. And my brother lives up here. He's a medieval history professor. So, and plus I've heard such great things about the Equinox and its legacy, so I decided to jump at it, and here I am.
Now, Roger, being in a career in hotel management, some of these places you cited, these exotic locations, is it all exciting, or are there real mundane managerial issues that managers have to deal with at hotels?
Well, there is, the fun thing about the hotel business is that it gives you an opportunity to travel and live in different countries, different areas, in the States, experience different people, different cultures. So that was, that's a lot of fun, when you're able to do that, especially, like living in a place like Brazil, which is a completely different culture from the rest of Latin America. Being able to do that is great, and being part of the community and learning about the community where you live and work is an exciting part of hotels. Every time, the hotel is a business, obviously, so you always have to make sure that you're making a profit, providing great guest experiences. Marketing and sales is an important part of it. So all that, it makes it, an important to make sure that you make the hotel successful. But that's the fun part of hotels, is being able to get out there and see the world.
And was this a career that you wanted to undertake? Is it something that you studied and trained for, or was it a vocation that you sort of just fell into?
Well, it kind of fell into it. My major in college was history, so I didn't go to school for hotels. But when I was in college, I did a semester abroad in Spain. And I didn't want to go back, so I was able to get a job as a tennis pro in a hotel out on the Costa del Sol in the Mediterranean. So that was nice. They gave me room and board, and they said, make whatever you make on the tennis courts. So it was great. The problem was that it was so hot there that nobody played tennis. So, I did, so what I did was I said, what, why don't I just, go into the kitchen and work a little bit and work in the restaurant. So I did that, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with the chef and cooking and food and beverage. So then when I finally graduated, I said, I'm going to try working in the business. So my first job was in New York City at the Vista International Hotel, which was right in between the two Twin Towers, not there anymore. Yeah. But that was sort of my first hotel job.
And does the hotel manager have to be the chief cook and bottle washer? Does he really have to be able to pitch in and know all of the different operations?
Well, you definitely, you have to be involved. You have to know what's going on in the different departments. You definitely, I think, to be successful in hotels, you got to be hands-on. So, and that enables you to kind of understand different processes that need fixing, or, it's a great way to bond with your associates. So yeah, you definitely have to jump in there and bust tables or jump on the dish machine or, help out wherever you can. It gives you a deeper understanding of your business and the hotel as well, and it's very good for employee motivation.
And when I think of hotels in Vermont, I want to reference Bob Newhart, who his show on for many years.
Sure.
And he was the proprietor of a motel, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah, and another great show is Faulty Towers.
Yes.
Where, again, owner of your own hotel. And that's always, it's funny, a lot of people come to Vermont with that fantasy of, I love it here, I'm going to open a bed and breakfast, quit my job. But a lot of times they don't realize all the work that goes into it. You got to make the beds, you got to make that breakfast. So, I try to sort of give them some dose of reality mixed with the fantasy. And
just for the record, Tom Bodette of Motel 6, Leave the Lights On.
We'll leave the lights on for you.
He's a Vermont resident. So,
I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah, he's always on NPR on that show. I forget the name of the show, but every weekend he's on there, part of the panel.
Yeah. So, Roger, when I first met you at the introductory reception, I discovered that you were a history buff.
Right.
And the Equinox certainly has an abundance of history. And originally it opened as the Marsh Tavern in 1769, right?
That's right. Yes. And that's what attracted me to the position was the great history the Equinox has. It opened in pre-revolutionary days. And the Marsh Tavern and that part of the hotel is the original part of the footprint of the hotel. And it's amazing.
William Marsh.
Right, William Marsh, who happened to be a Tory sympathizer, thought the British were going to win. But it was funny because the Green Mountain Boys, Ira and Ethan Allen, actually met in the Marsh Tavern. And Marsh Tavern was kind of a little bit of a hotbed for revolutionaries. And Ira and Ethan Allen, they had some wild ideas. They wanted to make Vermont part of maybe its own country. They were thinking of going with Canada. And they were in Marsh Tavern. They said, this place is making money pretty good. So they said, let's take it over. So they took it over. William Marsh fled to Canada, and it helped raise money for the revolution. Just terrific.
Well, remember that Vermont was not one of the original 13 colonies, too.
Right.
Vermont didn't come in till, I think, 10, 12, 14 years afterwards.
That's right. And I think they always resisted. There's even a story of how the Green Mountain Boys, Ira and Ethan Allen, would go to New York and tar and feather New Yorkers that were opposed to, trying to get Vermont to go their way.
So the Vermont Tavern, it sort of fell into a bad period there, and then in 1801, there was this Thaddeus Munson, right?
That's right. Yeah, and it's gone through all different kinds of names. Marsh Tavern, Thaddeus Munson Inn, Widow Black's Inn. It even was called the Taconic at one point.
Right.
Right. But so, it's had all different names through its history. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, it has a terrific Lincoln legacy. Mary Todd Lincoln stayed there twice, 2 summers, loved it, brought Robert Todd Lincoln there, and they wanted to make it their summer getaway. They loved Manchester. So the 3rd summer, they were going to bring Abraham Lincoln. And the hotel renovated. They even built a bed because, Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". And unfortunately, that was the summer that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Sometimes the concierge says, if Abraham Lincoln had come to the Equinox, maybe history would have been different.
Now, there actually were 4 presidents that stayed at the Equinox,
That's right. That's right. One of the famous ones was Theodore Roosevelt. He actually did his campaign speech from the patio outside Marsh Tavern. That was a huge event in town. Other presidents, Benjamin Harrison stayed, Calvin Coolidge, Ulysses S. Grant. So it has a lot of famous presidents that have stayed there.
And any, not that a general manager wants to disclose or invade the privacy of their guests, but any interesting stories about these presidents during their stays there?
Interesting stories. Well, back then, people stayed at hotels for long periods of time, 4 weeks, 5 weeks at a time, almost like a cruise ship, because it was hard to kind of walk around town. All the roads were dirt and muddy. So they would just stay there and eat and drink. And
we didn't have all the outlets.
That's right. That's right. We had there was sort of a monopoly back then as well. Right. That's right. But one of the things, and one of the presidents did do this when he stayed, is they used to have a scale that they would weigh you, right, when you arrived. And that scale actually is still in our spa in the relaxation area, yes. And they would write it down, and somewhere they have, how much Benjamin Harrison, I think, weighed. And, after your stay, they would weigh you again. And if you gained weight, that was a successful stay.
Really?
Yes. So, Benjamin Harrison, I think, participated in that program. I don't know how that would go over nowadays. I think things have changed. But back then, that was a great stay if you gained weight.
Now, I imagine today having a president to stay there would almost be impossible. I mean, they would probably have to take over the whole hotel, right? They would mobilize it, right?
Right, and that's, working in other hotels that have had presidential visits, you have a whole team that comes in ahead of time, and, between the Secret Service and the technical people and telephone people, and there's a whole huge setup in preparation for a visit of a president. It might be tough for the Equinox to handle that one.
So, but back then, I guess, from some of the photos I've seen, like with Roosevelt, when he visited Teddy Roosevelt, there was some staff and a little,
sure,
right? But
yeah, there's a great picture in one of our in the hotel that shows Teddy Roosevelt in his car, in sort of his motorcade, and there's all different people sitting in the car. But then you have crowds just going up, and you could see that they're approaching him and trying to shake his hand. So I think back then access was probably a lot easier. Not as many Secret Service.
So, but let's get back to the ownership of the Equinox, because the Orvis family, which is very big in Manchester, they were actually the owners of the Equinox for a good period of time, right?
That's right.
Orvis family. So
yes.
Give us a little
Orvis,
perspective on that.
Right. The late 1800s, early 1900s, the Orvis family did own the Equinox, and they did a lot to make Manchester the tourism center it is today. And they did a lot of expansion in the Equinox. Actually, where the lobby of the hotel is now, Union Street would just pass right through that lobby and go all the way up back to the access to the Equinox Mountain. So they're the ones that added on that lobby area, as well as another wing to the hotel opposite the Marsh Tavern. And that was a big expansion back then for those days. The Orvis family would actually go down Union Street with their stagecoach, and they would pick up guests that came in from the train from New York, pick them up and take them back to the hotel. So, and they did a lot of co-marketing with New York, because they had another hotel in New York. I can't recall the name right now, but they did a lot of co-marketing. New York was a big, big market back then for them, as it is today. The Orvis family also, they had a lot of different businesses back then that complemented the hotel. The Equinox Mountain, which is right behind the hotel, had 3 natural springs. So they had a bottling plant. And they went ahead and they bottled spring water still, sparkling. They had their own line of soft drinks. Ginger champagne was a popular flavor, not alcoholic. I think it went for 5 cents a bottle for 16 ounces. Not a bad price, right? So that was a big business. And then the other business that they had was they would have the pond area, which is about a 15-acre area that's part of the hotel.
It's still used today, of course.
Still used today for
weddings and receptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's about a mile hike from the hotel, but just a gorgeous area. And they actually, in the winter, would sell ice, about 13-inch blocks, and they would sell that to New York for refrigeration. So that was another big business they had as well.
Now, Mrs. Orvis, she was the feminine leader of her day, so to speak.
That's right.
She
yes,
was a real trailblazer, right?
Yeah, I mean, her husband, George Orvis, actually passed away by swimming in the pond. He hit his head, had an accident, passed away. So she ended up running the Equinox Hotel for about 20 years. And she was a real trailblazer. And back in the day, she was a big part of building the golf course. I think.
Well, you had the Aquatic golf course.
That's right. That's right.
And as I understand it, the Equinox golf course today was originally part of the Aquatic, right?
Right, part of that, that's true. But then it was separated, and I think Louise Orvis tried to get a membership at the Aquatic golf course, but back then I don't know if they'd let ladies play. So she said, I'm going to build my own golf course. So she did a lot to develop the golf course that we have today.
So she played golf there, again, a very historic property. And while we're on the subject, there have been some restorations of the golf course or
That's right.
renovations. I think there was one maybe 25 years ago last, right?
Well, the last renovation of the hotel itself was in 2008. And that was rooms, public space, and restaurants. Now, right now, we're going through a second renovation. And again, it's all public space, meeting space, restaurants, as well as all guest rooms. And we're in that process right now. We haven't closed the hotel because it's not a hugely invasive renovation. It's mostly carpet, wallpaper, lighting, furniture. But they've been able to incorporate some really nice historical elements in the design of the hotel to help celebrate its history. For example, behind the front desk, we found this sort of mail slot cubbies, like in the old days.
The old days, right.
And they completely restored it, and they put it behind the front desk, and it's just beautiful, just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I guess it's a challenge with renovations or restorations, you're on the National Register, right, of
That's right.
historical
It's a historic
hotels.
landmark. That's right.
Right. And as a wood frame building, there must be a lot of challenges.
Right.
There was
and
a huge fire, I think, back in the 60s, was it? Or 70s?
I think so, South Wing. I think that was when the Gillespie Group owned the property, and they had that fire, yeah. And they had to rebuild one whole wing of the hotel. I mean, that part of it, being a historical landmark in Vermont, you have certain limitations of what you can do to modernize and renovate. One is you have to keep the original clapboard of the hotel. So, I mean, we try to repair and paint and keep it up to date as much as we can, but you can't really do that modern insulation. Same thing with the windows. The windows are all original. So as you walk around the hotel, you can see some that are kind of crooked. You see the blown glass. Absolutely beautiful, but again, to sort of keep up to date with, energy savings and that kind of thing, that's tough because you can't touch those things. It's historically protected.
And I guess some of the stone and, right?
Right. Some of the foundations, some of the
Right.
stones. Yeah, you can't really touch any of that. And that's really important. And, part of that, what they always look for is anything that you want to do, you want to tell the story of how you're going to celebrate the history of the hotel. Now, that's part, I think, of the charm of a New England resort, especially the Equinox. Sometimes floor is a little bit slanted, it creaks a bit, But that's what makes it so charming. That's what people love about it, versus a newly constructed hotel.
Well, there is an audience who follow historic hotels, right? I mean, who want to stay at these properties and
That's
all,
right.
right?
Yeah, I mean, and they take tours of the different hotels, and we have the advantage of having a history that goes back to pre-revolutionary days, as well as the grounds and everything else. And we do own 900 acres, which is part of the hotel, which is it's actually the Equinox Mountain area, that's in a land preservation trust. So we have a land preservation board that makes sure that we protect that land, keep it up to date, and we even have a land steward that's part of the property that does that. Part of the resort fees that we charge, some of that goes to help fund and protect that land.
While we're talking history, I want to make two notes. Mrs. Orvis, she was actually the spearhead, I believe, of the Southern Vermont Arts Center, which is right down the road on West Road from the Equinox. And I think around 1940, if I'm correct, she held some meetings or receptions right at the Equinox to launch the Southern Vermont Arts Center.
Right, and that's how that partnership started with the Southern Vermont Arts Center. We always work very closely with them. We always do great events there. People just love that Southern Vermont Arts Center, and it's a big part of the sort of the legacy and the partnership between Equinox and that area.
Now, Roger, there are many stories on the internet and in the news media. I think USA Today had a big one, and again, tying in history. And Mary Todd Lincoln and her son, Tad, who stayed there.
Right.
There's a lot of belief that the Equinox is haunted with the ghost of Mary Todd Lincoln and her son. And there's even a story about some, I guess, maintenance guy at the Equinox who saw chairs move around and what have you.
Well, I've heard those stories. I myself have not had a personal experience. When I first started, I lived in the hotel for about 6 months, and there's certain times of the year where hotel has some really low occupancy, and you kind of walk down that corridor and it's quiet, and you think about those two girls in The Shining, at the end of the corridor. But I did not have any personal experience with any kind of spirits. I know that people do talk about the spirit of Mary Todd Lincoln. I think also part of that comes from some of the history that she had with Robert Todd Lincoln. There was sort of a scandal back in the day. After President Lincoln passed away, she had sort of a nervous breakdown. And her son, Robert Todd Lincoln, actually committed her to an insane asylum.
Yes. And
she reacted pretty negatively to that, spoke to the press, and it was sort of the People magazine scandal of the day. So, that was sort of an unhappy period, I think, in both their lives.
And Robert Todd Lincoln, of course, established a big presence up here.
Right, he loved it. He loved it up here. I mean, he was an important guy in his day. He was a captain of industry. He owned the Pullman railroad cars, like in the Wild Wild West, the real luxurious ones. He was part of Garfield's cabinet. And he loved it so much, he built Hildene, his family home, which is right down the road from the hotel.
But I think it's room 327, right?
I'm not sure which room it is, but it is. I think it's on the third floor. It's on that, in the older part of the section of the hotel. Those rooms actually are right above Marsh Tavern.
So have many people stayed in room 327?
Sure, plenty of people.
So if there were more... If there were more ghosts, we would have heard about it.
You would have heard about it, yes. It would have been out there for sure. But since I've been there, I haven't heard any guests, complaining.
Have you stayed in 327?
I've stayed in most of those rooms on that side, and I have had no experiences.
Mm-hmm. Now, I said earlier there was a fire in the 70s. It's actually, I think, 1985.
Right.
And at that point, the Equinox was closed for a period. And then, as I understand it, Governor Richard Snelling, who was governor at the time, had a big economic initiative to transform Manchester, and the outlet center stores, as we know them today, began to come in. And the Equinox, I guess, was given to a group of investors or new owners on the understanding that if they were given the hotel, the property, that they would make a major investment in reopening it.
Right.
And
right, and the Gillespie Group was a big part of that initiative and was able to get government funding from the state to bring the Equinox back to its glory days. So he was able to use that funding and make some major investments and did some terrific renovations, and then brought back the Equinox to being open and being a great hotel. So that was a critical part of its history. Since then, there's been different owners.
I think the Guinness
used
company,
to own it.
right?
Yep, Guinness Company owned it. Rock Resorts owned it. And then recently, before Kerry Watermark, HEI Hotel.
Well, Rock Resorts is Lawrence Rockefeller, who did a tremendous amount for this state.
Right.
There's a big national park upstate that
that's right.
Lawrence Rockefeller was responsible for.
Right. I think the family very much loved Vermont and loved spending a lot of time here.
So, and Rock Resorts is still very much present, and I don't think the Rockefellers are associated with it
I don't think
anymore.
so, but they do have hotels, and they're still very active, definitely.
Roger, it seems that a lot of hotels, there's always acquiring and selling of properties. It seems that there's a lot of turnover every couple of years. I don't know what the managerial science is behind that.
Well, it's very
but
much...
it seems to go on throughout the industry.
Sure, and it's very much a trend throughout the United States. It's very much a real estate business. So owners come in and they purchase it as real estate, and then they try to increase the value through, better margins, great guest service scores and experiences, and try to raise that value of the hotel so that it becomes a profitable real estate investment. And then obviously, if they have a buyer that is interested, they turn it over. So that happens a lot in the hotel business.
And there are visitors, I've seen them at the Equinox, who do come, say, for a month, or even the whole summer. I've seen
Yes, especially
people,
the horse show that happens July and August. It's when you get a lot of those long stay guests that come and they participate in the horse show, and they just stay for weeks and weeks, which is great. I mean, that is always great for the hotel, and I think great for the community as well.
So, Roger Aberth, General Manager of the Equinox, I want you to give our audience a personal invitation from the GM as we close our show.
Sounds good. Yes, please come by the Equinox. Love to have you. We always try to do events that connect us with the community. We had a tree lighting ceremony in December, and we did a Halloween event last year, and we're going to do more of those in the future. We have our Easter buffet coming up, so please come by. Love to see you.
And Roger will always be there to talk history, right?
I do history presentations at least once a week, especially on the weekends. So come by. Love to have you.
Roger Aberth, thank you very much for being our guest. He's the General Manager of the Equinox Hotel in Manchester, Vermont. This is Danny Frank for GNAT TV.